This is the Big Stories Podcast, where we tell the amazing and inspiring stories from across the Big 12 Conference.
Welcome to Big Stories. We hope you had a good President's Day weekend. I had a 3-day weekend, sort of. Okay, so I got most of Monday off from work. Anyway, we're going to do something different for our Tuesday episodes for the rest of this season. We've wanted to focus on the biggest storylines in the conference each and every week, and we've also wanted to feature every football and basketball team in the conference in some capacity, not just the teams that are doing great. We will continue to do that, but it's going to mainly be done through interviews with podcasters, journalists, and broadcasters from teams around the Big 12. So that's what we're going to do starting this week. But you know me, I can't completely give up on the storylines.
The Big Stories' 5 biggest storylines. Number 5.
Kansas State fires Jerome Tang. If you paid attention to people covering the Kansas State Wildcats, this isn't a surprise. I just hope the players can move on from here and don't just mail it in the rest of the season. I'm not sure how many games they're going to win the rest of the season, but I hope the guys can play for more than just looking for their next opportunity.
Number 4.
I'm bummed that BYU has lost Richie Saunders after the Cougars' wingman tore his ACL in BYU's overtime win against Colorado. I'm bummed for 2 reasons. First, it's the end of his career as a Cougar. I hate it when anyone can't finish out their college career due to injury. Second, BYU's Big 3 now becomes a Big 2. If BYU wants to really challenge the rest of the conference this season, other guys are going to have to step up and play better. Well, then again, maybe that's something to be excited about.
Number 3.
Arizona loses 2 games in a row. I don't think Wildcat fans should be too concerned. Both were by single digits to pretty good teams. Yes, they have some good teams coming up and could lose a few more games, but I think that will only strengthen this team.
Number 2.
How about a sleeper team to watch the next few weeks? TCU. They've only lost by double digits twice during the conference season and have a very manageable schedule the rest of the way. They might be in the middle of the pack by the time the conference tournament rolls around, but they're good enough to beat just about any team on any given day.
Number 1.
All right, Player of the Year update. I would say JT Toppin is making a strong case for becoming the POY for a second straight season after a strong showing against Arizona. A guy who I didn't consider last week, and I should have, was Iowa State's Joshua Jefferson. The senior forward is second on the team in points, but he's the Cyclones' leading rebounder, and he's second on the team in assists, barely behind point guard Tamin Lipsey, both averaging around 5 assists per game. Yeah, I should have included him last week. I will say again, I'm glad I'm not voting because there are a lot of strong candidates. Speaking of the Cyclones, their big Monday game was against the Houston Cougars in Ames. So who came out on top? Iowa State freshman sub Jamarian Bateman hit a 3 to give the Cyclones a 1-point lead late. Then Houston freshman Kingston Flemings gave the Cougars the lead back. But another ISU sub, Nate Heisey, nailed a 3 to give the Cyclones a 2-point lead. And Iowa State ends up winning the game 70-67. Did I mention how much I love the Big 12? All right, story time. I mentioned in an earlier podcast how much fun it was to see UCF be the thorn in team sides. I mean, they beat Kansas this season, played Arizona tough in a loss, and they also beat Texas Tech. In fact, they were on a 3-game winning streak, and then they've been humbled. Before the Knights took on West Virginia over the weekend, I chatted with Jeff Sharon of the Night Shift podcast and Black and Gold Banneret about what we've learned from this team in their roller coaster conference season.
Well, I actually think we haven't learned as much about the team as we will in this upcoming stretch, right? Because you play Houston. Houston's really good. They're in the mix for not just the Final Four. I think they're a legit national title contender once again with that defense. Plus Flemings is just an explosive scorer that I think they've been missing the last few years. And Cincinnati is always a tough team defensively. And I think Cincinnati had the benefit of being like the more desperate team at that moment. I think we're going to find out what happens with this team in the next week or two. Actually, this next 4 games will probably do the same, because how do you recover off of those 2 road losses, right? UCF did lose, earlier this season. We lost by 7 to Arizona at home. Gave them a pretty good game, I thought. And then went on the road right after that to Iowa State and lost by 30. right? But then we stay on the road the next game, beat Colorado. Now, I know Colorado's not at the top of the Big 12, but that's still a tough thing to do to you lose on the road by 30, come back, win on the road in the furthest road trip in the conference, right? So I think we're going to find out what happens in these next 2 games at home against West Virginia and TCU. And I think UCF benefits from having the midweek game off this week. So it's some time to get a little bit healthier. Jeremy Fumetta actually just came back. He's been out for a little bit of a while, but he really got off to a good start as one of our backup bigs coming off the bench and played a lot of minutes. Actually played more minutes than John Bold did before he got hurt. And then the road trip out to Utah and play Utah and BYU back to back. That's going to be a real measuring stick for this team. I know Utah's struggling right now, but that's still not an easy place to play for anybody.
How is the team handling this? I mean, I would think there's this kind of roller coaster of emotions because you beat 2 good teams and you're like, hey, we're doing okay, and then you lose, and not only do you lose, you get blown out. I mean, how have the players handled this bit of a setback right now?
I've been really impressed with how much of a short memory this group has. You got to remember, we returned 0 scoring from last year. Okay, our best player, our longest tenured player, Darius Johnson, finally graduated. We had Keyshawn Hall last year, who led the Big 12 in scoring, and then went to Auburn, this year, and he's tearing it up over there. So Johnny Dawkins had to hit the reset button, and to his immense credit, and to his staff's credit, he's pulled together a group of not just really talented players that fit what he wants to do on both sides of the ball, but they're very mentally tough. They're probably the toughest team mentally I've seen here at UCF in a long time. Nothing against some of the previous teams that we've had, but I think what we've seen where they've been able to bounce back after losses is a key to that. And I think the key player in this has been Themis Fulks, our point guard, who's really been a journeyman in college basketball, but 5th-year guy, came over with Jermichael Stillwell from Milwaukee, and has been the straw that stirs the drink, to quote Reggie Jackson. I mean, he's been incredibly consistent. So far this season, actually, look, he's top 2 or 3 in the Big 12 in assists and assists per game. He's kind of batting back and forth. I'm actually going to pull up the correct stats right here. Right now, he's second in the conference in assists, total assists, and assists per game, at 6.8 per game, and he's been and also 13th in the conference in assist to turnover ratio, which is actually pretty good for a point guard at this point. So, and he's been the clear leader of the team. I think it really starts at the top. Johnny Dawkins has always been known as a guy who's kept. He's known for keeping an even keel. When everybody's losing their heads around you, he keeps his, and I think that's filtered down to Themis Fulks. I think that's filtered also to Riley Kugel and Jordan Burks too, who's been an outstanding defensive presence for this team. As good as an offensive player as he's been, defensively he's been outstanding. So I think some UCF fans are worried about a collapse because we've had them in the past. I don't think we're headed for that. I think they're going to be they have a chance to finish strong, and the schedule, even despite coming up with BYU and Utah out in Provo and Salt Lake City coming up, when you look at the rest of the schedule for the month of February, it does kind of help them out a little bit.
You mentioned, and we've talked about on this podcast, how the majority, or as you said, no scoring return. There were only a couple of guys who returned from this team that were on last year's team. Almost everyone else transferred in. How have your expectations changed with the Knights from preseason now, or did you even have expectations just because you didn't know what you were going to get?
It's the latter. We didn't know what to expect. Even early in the season, when we got a couple of key wins, we played. Hofstra was actually our opening game, right? And I remember watching that game. We played them very tight, but like Hofstra's pretty good. I think they're going to get. They should be. They might steal that auto bid. Gave up 105 to Vandy in the second game right after that and lost by 12 at home. And I thought, man, I just don't know what we've got right now because obviously they're giving up a lot of points. They want to play a high pace, obviously. And that's a double-edged sword, right? But I think when, as the season progressed, they went to A&M, beat Texas A&M by 12 in College Station. And that's when we started to think, okay, this is a little bit different. Maybe Texas A&M is struggling a little bit, but that's again, still a hard place to play. Beat Pitt in Daytona by 10 points. And I think one of the things that this team was really able to figure out that helps that out is they know how to adjust their pace. They kind of ride the throttle a little bit. And they've won, high scoring games. We had to score 102. We scored 102 points against Florida Gulf Coast, for example. And then we beat, Arizona State. They did a very good job on us defensively, but we still, held them to 76 points and got the job done. And so we've come to expect this team to kind of, especially late. We've had some comeback wins too, especially the Arizona State game being a very good example of that, where they've been very strong down the stretch. We've also had some games where we had some pretty big deficits that we cut into, but couldn't quite get the job done in some of those losses. But like I said earlier, I think this is a pretty mentally tough team. They're experienced. A lot of these guys that we brought in are fifth year senior guys or redshirt juniors, have been around college basketball for a long time. It's not quite what Indiana football was able to do, but it's kind of a miniature version of that.
Yeah, I understand. 105 points you said they gave up to Vandy. Now, Vandy's a good team. I'm not taking that away from them. They gave up 92 to Cincinnati, and I know you just mentioned that they like to play at a high pace, but I also know that Johnny Dawkins, or I remember Johnny Dawkins being a defensive menace when he was at Duke. I also know Duke, under Mike Krzyzewski, also liked to play at a high pace too. Is he okay with where this team is at defensively, or is that just going to be something that they're working at, going into the latter part of this season?
Well, he'll tell you no, but I think one of the things that this is sort of the new era of college basketball that we're in is like when you're returning all these new or when you're returning nobody, I should say, you have to develop a system that is relatively easy to install because you can't rely on your third, fourth, fifth year guys to be around to teach the young guys that the new system. And I want to give credit to Adam Hood, he's sort of our offensive coordinator in terms of the assistant coach. He's figured out how to develop an offensive system that they install over the course of the year. That's pretty easy for the players to sort of understand. He's probably the most animated assistant coach in the Big 12 on the sidelines. When you watch the games, you'll see. But and I think Johnny has had to adjust to that because it's easier to play with pace, right? Because everyone's kind of used to that. If you're playing, in the gym or in the playground, you're playing with pace. And when you don't really, you don't have anybody that you actually run a system with, right? So we keep the pace high. And I think what Johnny has really focused on is leveling up the defensive intensity in the final 5 to 10 minutes of the game. I think that's where UCF has really come into their own, is that they know when and how to turn that defensive switch on. And when they figure out the right rotation to have and figure out the right matchups to have in a game, that's when they're able to level up that defensive intensity. I thought the Arizona State game and the Texas Tech game, those two recent wins, were really good examples of that, about how, we kept the pace high, but then once crunch time happened, they were able to buckle down. And the Arizona State, when you look at the film, that was a really good example of what I think they can do. It looks like they're struggling for the first 30, 35 minutes. I won't lie. But, it's like, okay, are we going to turn it on now? Yeah, we can. Now let's see if we're behind, if we can make it close. If we're ahead, put the other team away.
Lastly, you talked about the night schedule coming up. It looks very favorable. Only one ranked team as of right now, the rest of the season. It's looking like, if I had to take a look at it, now granted I'm from afar, but it's looking like you guys are going to have a a winning record at the end of conference season, maybe a decent seed in the Big 12 conference. If that happens, I would think that is a huge plus on not only for the program, but for Johnny Dawkins too, showing, hey, look what I can do. And fans get behind this because we've got a really good team too.
I agree. Right now, their net's at 44. So they really have to, there's kind of, I still feel like there's not a lot of margin of error here. I mean, and I go, and I look at the road games because the Big 12, the key that I thought, the three keys coming into this season, I thought for this team were A, protect the home court, B, 20 wins heading into the conference tournament, C, 500 or better in conference heading into the conference tournament, and then D, don't be one and done in the conference tournament. And that should be enough just based on sheer, force of will alone in this, gauntlet of a conference to get you in as an at-large. I think the conference has actually turned out to be pretty good so far. I think better than expected. So maybe that, maybe 500 in the conference, and 1-1, 2-1 in the tournament, may not be enough if you have some bad losses on the slate. I think that UCF still doesn't have, I think, in conference play, the sort of signature road win. Right now, I think their best win on the road so far has been K-State, who we beat by 9. We saw what, K-State was able to do last night. But yeah, I still think that there's, I would feel better, and I think they would feel better if they were able to steal a game up on, on the road that they might not have been favored to do. Right now, the best candidates for that, obviously, BYU and West Virginia. BYU is obviously going to be very tough. I mean, I don't need to tell you about how tough it is to play in Provo, but and West Virginia is the other one in the last game of the season. I think that's going to be a very tough game to play too. And then defend the home court, we have West Virginia, TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma State at home to finish out. I prefer, if we're going to play a team twice, like we are the Mountaineers, I prefer to play them on the road the second time so that you're not, what you're getting at home and you're at least familiar with them going into a hostile environment, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's a possibility here of let's see, 1, 2, 3, we're looking at 7 games to go. They could, if they go 6-1, that's pretty good. I would like to, get one more over a team that's kind of above us in the standings before I feel really comfortable. But UCF fans are never really comfortable with, at-large, with getting an at-large. We've only gotten one in the history of our program, one at-large bid in the tournament. So, but this is as good a shot as any since the Taco Fall team in 2019.
Now to a team that is not great, good, or bad. They're just kind of, how would you say it? A bit below average. We're talking about the Colorado Buffaloes. This is a team that started the season on an 8-game winning streak. And then they stumbled against Colorado State, Stanford, and Northern Colorado. Yeesh. By the way, Northern Colorado is not atop the Big Sky standings. The Young Buffs lost 6 games in a row in conference, won 2 of 3, and then they were blown out at Texas Tech by 34. Wow. Coach Tad Boyle said his team didn't deserve to take the charter flight home from Lubbock. Now, they did play BYU a lot better, but before they took on the Cougars in Provo, I chatted with voice of the Buffs, Mark Johnson, about where this team is physically and mentally right now.
Well, when Tad, by the way, made that comment about not being worthy of the charter flight home, I wanted to make sure he wasn't including the broadcaster in that because I told him afterward we're getting ready to get in the plane. I said, I called a win on my end, so I was hoping you weren't going to kick me off the plane, right? So let the players figure that out. This team has been interesting. It's a young basketball team that, like a lot of schools, right? You're adding a lot of newness every year. We understand what college athletics is now. And so it's a young team, but it might be as Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to home and away as any team I've been around. Last Wednesday, horrible game at Iowa State, right? the week before, or the weekend before, the Buffs win at home in a game over TCU. And so then they come back after the bad loss at Iowa State, and they have a great win over Arizona State, and then go on the road against Texas Tech and lay an egg for 34. And so you can kind of see a pattern here. And there's, for whatever that psychological reason is, they cannot seem to find the same type of intensity on the road as they find at home is very head-scratching. And if Tad Hadley here, he'd be pulling it out at this point in time. But, some of that's going to be because of youth, I think. There's only one senior on this team. And so you got a lot of young guys, and they're trying to figure it out. He had a very nice freshman class. And then the other two guys that are quote-unquote veteran players, one's a sophomore, one's a junior, and still a little bit green, but they put more responsibility on them. And so maybe they're not as seasoned as you want to be. And so it's just a team that is really very different when they're in the CU Event Center as compared to being on the road. And I think a lot of that comes down to psychology, and it's a frustrating issue for his team right now.
You mentioned about the young guys who are on this team. Freshman Isaiah Johnson, he's been leading the team in scoring at just over 16 points a game. He's also dishing out close to 3 assists a game. There are so many good freshmen in the conference. But how has he impacted this Buffs team, and what more could he bring to big games?
I think if there were not as many outstanding freshmen in this league, and obviously in Provo there's maybe the best, he'd probably get a little bit more attention, because he is an outstanding player. What your listeners might not know about him, first off, his godfather is Dwayne Wade. His father was a longtime NBA trainer who was involved with Clutch Sports, which is LeBron's deal. And so I asked Isaiah one time, I said, when did you start playing pickup games with NBA guys? He said he was about 12 when he would go with his dad, and he was out there playing with those guys. We're down in Tempe, Arizona to open up conference play here a number of weeks ago, and Chris Paul just shows up just to come and see him. And so, after the game, they're sitting over by themselves talking. And so he's grown up in the NBA because of what his father does, and so he's very comfortable with all of that. And so he's been surprising from the standpoint of how good he is. Now, if you see him, he looks like he's 14 years old still to this day. I mean, he's a youthful young man. He only weighs about 165 pounds. He's 6'1", but there's an innate toughness about him that really is impressive. He's one of those guys that no matter what you do, he still finds a way to get to the rim. He's a very good shooter, and he's got areas to grow like any young player. But he really has brought a consistency. I think he and Barrington Hargress, who is the point guard that transferred in from Riverside, I think those two guys have really been kind of the cornerstone. If there is anything that's consistent on this team, it's been those two up to this point. But Isaiah is a special player, and I don't think there's any question we're going to see him play in the NBA. He's got to grow up a little bit physically and improve his game, but he's really been a great addition for Tad Boyle.
Who are some of the other young guys who could guide the Buffaloes to greener pastures in the future?
Well, I mentioned that freshman class really turned out to be a nice group. And, Tad, not being a big money program, if you will, which, you kind of have to be in college athletics now. If you're not going to be a big money program, what you've got to be is a great evaluating program. And if you look at the history of Tad's program over the previous 15 seasons, he's gone out and found guys that developed into NBA players. Spencer Dinwiddie, Derek White, Andre Robertson, on and on down the line. KJ Simpson, who's been in the NBA. There's been plenty that have come through the program. And so Tad's been a great evaluator. And so when you ask about some of the other young guys at this point, on top of Isaiah, there's a young man named Jalen Holland. He's out of New Mexico, who's 6'5", 6'6", long, athletic, kind of gritty, shoots the ball real well. Ian Inman is a similar type of athlete. He's a young man that comes out of Houston, Texas. He found a kid named Taco Ifaula. His first name is Fawaz, but he goes by Taco. And he's 7 feet tall, and he found him. He was at a prep school here in the States. He's from Nigeria, very raw but athletic. And so he's found guys. And then I almost forgot there's a local kid by the name of Josiah Saunders, who's kind of a gritty 6'5", kind of thick, almost looks like a defensive end type body, and just gets physical and seems to come up with loose balls, and one of those kind of guys. And so he's found some talent. Now, the problem is they're all, for the most part, 18 years old, and so they've got to learn to play this game in what is the best college basketball conference in America. So there's a nice nucleus there. Now the question becomes, in 2026 college basketball, can you keep them together? And, that used to be a foregone conclusion. Now you count on nothing until everyone's signing the dotted line, so we'll see if he can keep that group together moving forward.
There are winnable games the rest of the season for CU, and then you got some games against Houston and Arizona coming up, too. Realistically, what is Coach Boyle and his staff hoping to get out of this Buffs team before we all matriculate over to Kansas City for the Big 12 Conference Tournament?
Yeah. Well, I think what he's looking for is just give them consistency and effort at this point in time. If they can do that, they're talented enough to play with just about anybody. I mean, look at it. There was a lopsided loss, certainly, just a few days ago down to Lubbock, Texas by 34 points to Texas Tech. But the Buffs did have a game-winning shot and lost by 2 at home to Texas Tech. So they can play with teams, but they've got to have consistency. And then those games where maybe you do have second-level teams in the Big 12, you've got to use that consistency to win those ball games. Now, the good news is for Colorado, the bulk of the ones you're referring to are in Boulder. And so you got to take advantage of that. So if they can, down the stretch of this season here, the last, 3 weeks or so of the regular season, find that consistency of intensity and continue to play well in other areas where they have played well, and then take that to Kansas City. And, last year, it was kind of a rough year, the first year back in the Big 12, and the Buffs went into Kansas City and made some noise. I mean, won a couple of ball games and then gave Houston a pretty good run for their money later on in the tournament. So I think Tad's looking at this and saying, okay, let's see if we can kind of capture that again and be the best Buffs basketball team by the time we get to Kansas City.
A huge thanks to Mark Johnson and Jeff Sharon for joining me on this podcast to talk about the Buffs and Knights. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Big Stories podcast to hear more amazing tales from around the Big 12. By the way, we have a special treat coming up for this Thursday's episode. I'm your host, Cleon Wall, and Big Stories is a production of BYU Radio.